the shadowed recesses of humanity's forgotten past, before the rise of the Imperium, there existed an era shrouded in darkness and despair, the Age of Strife. A time when the veil between reality and the unknown thinned, giving birth to horrors beyond comprehension. Welcome to Grimdark Shards. Tonight we delve into Shadows of Old Night, a harrowing tale of a world teetering on the brink, where the emergence of a Psyker threatens to unravel the very fabric of society. Prepare to witness the descent into madness, as hope fades and the abyss beckons. Should this journey into the grimdark enthrall you, consider supporting our endeavors. A tip of appreciation can be left at our Ko-fi sanctuary. The link resides in the archives below. Should you enjoy this tale, leave a like, and we hope to earn your subscription today. And remember, to stay abreast of our chronicles, strike the bell of notification. Now, steel your soul, for the descent begins. For millennia, humanity languished in the time of Old Night, a benighted age of isolation and collapse. Once glorious interstellar nations were severed by unnatural storms that raged across the void, cutting off world from world and heralding unending anarchy. In the wake of these tempests, countless planets fell into darkness and humanity's works withered to dust. Famine and ceaseless war became the new law of existence as mankind battled itself and horrors born of madness. Yet an even greater terror crept in beyond the edge of mortal sight. In those generations of despair, a new curse blossomed in scattered souls. Humans born with unnatural minds, witches as most came to call them, began to manifest powers beyond reason. They were feared on most worlds, persecuted as devils or slain at birth. And with good reason. Untamed witchery was a gateway to nightmare. The minds of these emergent psychics could bridge reality and the malignant unreality beyond, inviting in unspeakable entities hungry for mortal life. On world after world, unchecked sorcery opened the door to hell itself, and entire populations were enslaved or devoured by the fiends that came through. Only those communities ruthless enough to suppress or destroy anyone showing the curse, no matter the cost, would spare themselves such a fate. This is a tale from that dark epoch, a single flicker of tragedy lost among billions. It begins on a forgotten world, in a lonely human settlement clinging to the wreckage of better times. Here, one young man's fate will exemplify the doom of all those touched by the witch mark in the Age of Strife. In the dream, Arik stands amid Cyclopean ruins under a sky of boiling shadow. The air tastes of ash and screams. Towering silhouettes, neither man nor machine, skulk at the edge of sight, their eyes burning like coals. They whisper his name from the darkness between collapsed hab blocks and sundered statues. Arik, Arik. The sound is faint at first, like wind through a hollow, but it swells to a chorus of rasping voices. Arik's heart hammers. He takes a faltering step through the ruin. The ground is slick with blood. He sees pallid bodies sprawled in the debris, their faces frozen in terror. He recognizes some of them. Mira, the baker's daughter, with whom he traded jokes just yesterday, lies among the fallen, her dead eyes accusing him. An old sergeant who drilled the town militia. The blacksmith. One by one he knows their lifeless faces. This isn't real, Arik tells himself, choking back panic. I must wake up. But the whispers only grow louder, more insistent. A sickly light bleeds across the sky, and Arik sees that one of the immense shapes is now standing right before him. It is a monstrous outline of a man, easily 3 times his height. Tattered mail and scraps of armor cling to its warped frame. Where its face should be, there is only a swirling void. Arik It croons in a voice like shattering glass. A clawed hand reaches toward him, and in its palm coil flames that stretch like captive serpents. "Open the door, Arik." He stumbles back, shaking his head. "No, please." The giant figure bends low, bringing that yawning emptiness of a face mere inches from Arik's own. In its depths, he glimpses a storm of screaming souls. He cannot look away. The outstretched claw grips his shoulder with impossible force, the talons burning hot. "Open the door," the demon whispers, and Arik's resolve shatters. Agony lances through his skull. He throws back his head and screams, and jerks awake, gasping in the darkness of his small bunk. His skin is clammy with cold sweat, his heart pounding as if it will burst. It takes several long moments for reality to reassert itself. The nightmare fades to tatters, but the dread lingers. Arik presses a trembling hand to his shoulder, where the phantom claw had gripped him. By the pale glow of a dying power cell lamp, he sees nothing there but an old scar and fresh bruises from yesterday's work. No burn, no wound. Just a dream. A horrid dream, but no more. Outside, the wind howls over the metal shell of the hab unit where he lives. Arik can hear the distant thrum of the town's void shield generator straining to push back the toxic nightly fog. A reminder of reality, the constant struggle to survive another poisonous night. He swings his feet to the floor and sits on the edge of the cot, waiting for his racing pulse to slow. He dares not sleep again tonight. Dawn is only a couple of hours off anyway. Better to head to work early than face those nightmares again. In the gloom, Arik whispers a quiet litany his mother taught him as a child, an old plea to whatever benevolent spirits might linger in the world. "Embrace of the eternal, shelter me. Light of morning, banish the darkness within me." The words bring a small measure of comfort, as they always have. But as he dresses and straps on his boots, Arik can't shake the final echo of the dream voice from his mind. "Open the door," it had said. What door? What did it want from me? He doesn't know. With a last shiver, Arik pushes open the hatch and steps out into the ashen twilight of another day. Arik squinted against the dim, reddish daylight as he emerged onto Caldris's main street. Dawn in this world was a feeble thing. The sun hung low and rust-colored behind a haze of toxic cloud, granting light but little warmth. Around him, the settlement of Blackridge stirred to life. Lean-to-habs and corrugated metal huts lined the cracked thoroughfare, their surfaces scarred by years of acidic fog and dust. A few ancient street lamps flickered weakly before sputtering out in the growing light. Townsfolk in tattered coats and respirator scarves began their morning routines, wary eyes scanning the horizons even now. Old habits. Danger often came with the dawn as much as the night. Arik pulled his threadbare jacket tighter and stepped down from the hab block stoop. The air tasted of iron and ozone from the void shield's nightly discharge. Puddles of chemical dew glimmered oily red underfoot. He nodded to a pair of militia guards, dragging aside heavy plasteel barricades that reinforced the town's entrance gate. One of the men, Sergeant Kell, gave Arik a curt wave. The other, a younger guard with a bandaged stump where 2 fingers were missing, just offered a tight, fearful smile. Everyone in Blackridge bore scars of one kind or another. Ahead, the modest marketplace was coming alive under sagging awnings. A few traders were unpacking whatever meager goods they had. Bundles of fungal stalks from the grow vats, recycled water jugs, scavenged machine parts. Arik's destination lay at the far end of the square, the pump station and solar stills where he worked. As he weaved through the gathering townsfolk, he caught familiar faces in the sparse crowd. A hunched old woman knelt to chalk protective sigils on her doorstep, as she did every morning. The baker master Josen lit the burners of his rusted oven, already kneading dough made from whatever substitute grain they had managed to ferment. The smells of flatbread and algae soup drifted through the air, reminding everyone that they had survived another night. "Morning, Arik," came a bright voice from beside the bakery stall. Mira was arranging loaves on a wooden rack. Strands of dark hair escaped her headscarf, framing a grime-smudged but youthful face. She gave him a grin that stood out like a candle against the general gloom. "Morning," Arik managed, forcing a smile. The memory of her corpse in his nightmare flashed unbidden in his mind, and he had to suppress a shudder. It was so vivid. Her eyes clouded, blaming him. He swallowed and tried to will the image away. This was the real Mira, very much alive and smiling at him, with that gap between her front teeth. "You're up early," she noted with her usual kindness, dusting her hands with flour. "Couldn't sleep?" Arik shrugged and stepped closer so others wouldn't overhear. "Bad dreams," he admitted quietly. Mira's expression softened with concern. "Again? That's the third time this week, isn't it?" She knew him too well. Arik just nodded, rubbing the back of his neck. "About the usual?" she asked gently. They had spoken of his nightmares before, though he spared her the worst details. "More or less," he said. "No need to tell her she'd been in this one. Probably something I ate." He attempted a reassuring smirk. Mira pursed her lips, but let it drop. "Well, at least have some breakfast. Fresh out of the oven." She wrapped a still warm flatbread in a scrap of cloth and pressed it into his hand. Arik's stomach growled at the scent. "You're a lifesaver." He meant it in more ways than one. Without her insistence, he might forget to eat half the time. She wagged a finger. "Don't work yourself to death, hear me? The pumps can wait if you're dead on your feet." He gave a real smile then. "Yes, ma'am." With a nod of thanks, he tucked the bread into his satchel for later and continued on his way. Passing through the market, Arik unconsciously flexed the fingers of his left hand. The phantom sensation of that claw squeezing his shoulder had lingered since waking. It was fading now in the crisp morning air, but a dull ache in the back of his skull remained. He hoped some labor would chase it away. Blackridge's water purification station sat behind a mesh fence at the square's edge, crowned by arrays of fog collectors and creaking windmills. As Arik entered, he saw his mentor and supervisor Cole already at work. The gaunt, middle-aged man was wrestling with a wrench nearly as long as his arm, trying to loosen a stuck valve atop one of the sludge tanks. "You're early," Cole grunted without looking back. "Grab the other pipe, will you?" Arik set down his satchel and clambered up the side of the vat to brace the adjoining pipe assembly. With their combined effort, the corroded valve finally gave, emitting a spray of brownish water. Cole swore and jumped back, nearly losing his footing on the slick metal rung. Arik caught his elbow, steadying him. Cole let out a raspy chuckle. "Ha, quick hands. You must have had your caffeine this morning." "Something like that," Arik replied. In truth, he hadn't touched the bitter recaf they brewed from algae, but he was alert anyway, nerves on edge from the nightmare. They got back to work, draining and cleaning the filters, falling into a familiar rhythm. Cole muttered about the ever-failing equipment, this filter clogged, that gasket leaking. "We'll need to scavenge a replacement soon," he said, tapping a pressure gauge whose needle danced erratically. "If the weather clears, I might send a team to the old desalination plant up the coast. Heard there's still scrap to be picked there." Arik nodded, though he privately doubted the weather would clear. The corrosive fog that rolled in off the acidic seas rarely relented, and travel beyond the town walls was always risky. Mutant raiders prowled the wastelands more boldly these days, or so the last caravan had said before contact was lost. As if following his thought, Cole added in a lower voice, provided those bone-faced devils aren't stalking about. Lost 2 good folks last time we went scavenging. Came back in pieces, they did. He shook his head and spat over the side of the catwalk. Arik felt a chill, remembering the sight of Mira's lifeless form in his dream. Bone-faced devils, the town's name for the mutant marauders, whose degenerated faces often lacked noses, giving them a skull-like visage. The raids had been getting worse in recent months. Blackridge's meager militia could barely fend them off, and everyone knew it. We should be fine if we stick to daylight and keep a lookout, Arik offered, more to assure himself than Cole. Cole grunted non-committally. Maybe. Anyhow, finish scraping that muck. I'll check the solar arrays. Arik set to work scraping algae residue from the bottom of a purifier tank. It was messy, mundane labor, the kind that allowed his mind to wander. Usually he welcomed that small escape, but today his thoughts wandered dark paths. Cole wiped grime from his brow and gave Arik a long look. Go on, check the gauge on Reservoir 4 and take a breather, he said at last. Eat something. We'll resume in a bit. Arik did as he was told. He crossed the yard to the largest water reservoir, a bloated cylinder patched many times over, and tapped the fogged glass of its gauge. The needle bounced, stuck, then rose to an acceptable level. At least something was working normally. He sighed and sat on an upturned crate, pulling the flatbread Mira gave him from his satchel. It was still slightly warm. As he ate, he gazed absent-mindedly at the settlement beyond the station fence. From here he could see much of Blackridge, a haphazard cluster of buildings hunkered on a rocky rise above the bleak plains. Makeshift walls of scrap metal and sandbags encircled the perimeter, and at intervals, the dull glint of mounted autoguns hinted at the town's only defense besides its people. Beyond the walls stretched the wasteland, the corpse of a once verdant land, now reduced to toxic marshes, rusting skeletal factories, and dunes of ash. Distantly, lightning forked through banked clouds, portending another of the electrical storms that frequently swept the horizon. Arik tore off a piece of bread and chewed slowly. Normally, he might chat with Cole or hum a tune to himself during break, but today a strange lethargy hung over him. The sleepless night tugged at his eyes. He found his gaze drawn to the north, where the ruins of an ancient city loomed faintly through the haze. The shattered spires and collapsed hab blocks of Ivory City, named so for the pale color of its once majestic towers, beckoned on the horizon. Few dared scavenge there. It was said to be haunted ground, cursed since the old days. Still, something about the distant ruins always fascinated Arik. They symbolized a lost glory, perhaps, or a mystery never solved. He hopped off the crate, suddenly eager to be back at work among other people. Perhaps he'd visit Mira at midday if he got a chance. The thought of her friendly face was a welcome balm. Arik clapped dust from his gloves and walked back toward the sludge tanks. He tried to forget his eerie morning altogether. Little did he know, this day would not let him forget so easily. The sun hovered at its zenith behind yellow-brown clouds as Blackridge labored through the day. By midday, Arik's arms were sore and his mind still troubled. Cole had released him to grab lunch while the filtration systems cycled. Gratefully, Arik made his way back toward the market square, where Mira would likely be serving stew to the workers. He found her ladling portions of nutrient broth into clay bowls for a line of hungry townsfolk. When she saw him approach, she handed off the ladle to an assistant and stepped away, wiping her hands on her apron. Arik noticed she looked at him with a mix of relief and worry. "All right?" Mira asked, searching his face. Arik mustered a nod. "Better, I think. Work helps." It was a half-truth. Physical work had kept the worst of his thoughts at bay, but the odd incident that morning, the voices he shouldn't have heard, still nagged at him. He hadn't mentioned that to anyone. They sat together on a low wall at the edge of the square, each with a bowl of thin stew Mira had scooped aside. The meal was simple but hot, flavored with stringy greens and a hint of alcohol for warmth. Arik realized he was ravenous and began to eat in silence. Mira picked at hers, eyes never straying far from him. After a few minutes, she spoke softly. Arik, if these nightmares are getting worse, maybe you should talk to Elder Nona. She's dealt with bad dreams before, helped people chase away spirits. I'm not haunted by spirits, Arik muttered, a bit more sharply than intended. He immediately regretted it when he saw Mira flinch. He lowered his spoon. I'm sorry. I know you mean well. I'm just tired. Mira hesitated, then gently placed her hand over his. It's all right. I'm worried for you, that's all. You haven't been yourself. Even Master Cole mentioned it. Arik grimaced. Great. Does half the town think I've lost my wits? He tried to keep his tone light, but Mira's hand tensed on his. Of course not. People are just concerned. We all have bad spells. She managed a small smile. Remember when I couldn't sleep for a week after that raid last spring? I kept jumping at shadows. He did remember. She'd had nightmares after nearly being caught by a mutant in that attack. At the time, Arik sat with her many late hours, talking or just keeping watch outside her door until she felt safe again. That thought warmed him a little. Yeah, you got through that. I'll get through this. Mira squeezed his hand. Exactly. A sudden clatter interrupted them. Across the square, a trio of workers were unloading crates of scrap from an old anti-grav sled. One of the men pried a metal panel loose, and without warning, the tall crate beside it began to tilt. The laborers shouted and jumped back as the heavy crate toppled forward, directly toward a cluster of townsfolk gathered at a nearby food stall. Mira gasped. Among those in the crate's path was Master Josen, obliviously hunched over his bowl of stew. Arik moved without thinking. He leapt to his feet, thrusting out one hand instinctively. Look out, he cried. What happened next burned itself into Arik's memory in surreal detail. The crate, easily hundreds of kilos of steel and salvage, hurtled toward the ground, and then stopped, as if snagged in an invisible net. For the span of a heartbeat, it hung suspended a meter above the cobbles. In that frozen moment, a shocked silence gripped the square. The villagers beneath the crate scrambled away, Master Josen dropping his bowl as he stumbled clear in astonishment. Arik stood trembling, arm outstretched. He felt an unbearable pressure behind his eyes, a pounding like blood rushing in his ears. With a strangled groan, he jerked his hand back. The crate immediately crashed to the ground with a thunderous impact, splintering wood and spilling jagged metal parts across the street. Shouts erupted. A child started wailing. The workers who had been unloading stared wide-eyed from behind their sled. For an instant, Arik felt every eye in the market turning toward him. Mira was on her feet, one hand clutching her mouth, staring at Arik in confusion and dread. Arik's mind raced. Had they seen? Did they know it was him? He wasn't even sure what he had done, only that, in the dire moment, he had desperately wished for the crate to stop, and it did. Before anyone could react further, the old woman who drew sigils each morning suddenly screamed and pointed a gnarled finger at Arik. Witchery, she shrilled, her voice cutting through the chaos. I saw him. He held it in the air with witchery. Murmurs and gasps rippled outward from where Arik stood. He felt his heart seize in pure terror. No, he stammered, stepping back. It just caught on something. The crowd began to edge away from him, faces filling with alarm and suspicion. Master Josen, pale as flour, was hastily crossing himself with a sign against evil. Sergeant Kell and the younger guard came running from the gate, hands on their sidearms, unsure of what threat had caused the commotion. Mira snapped out of her shock. She sprang in front of Arik, her small frame between him and the gathering townsfolk. "Stop!" she yelled, voice high. It wasn't witchery, it was the Crane's grave suspenser kicking in, that's all. You all saw the anti-grav sled, right? It must have partially activated and held the crate up for a second. Her words tumbled out in a rush, but she spoke with convincing certainty. Arik blinked. He hadn't considered that explanation. Anti-grav units did sometimes behave erratically. Perhaps people would believe it. The laborers looked at their equipment uncertainly. One of them, catching on, nodded slowly. Yes. The sled's anti-grav. It's been acting up. Probably saved old Josen by luck." He forced a grin, trying to diffuse the fear. Sergeant Kell scowled and approached the fallen crate, prodding at the debris with his rifle's muzzle. "Everyone back to business," he barked. "Show's over. Get that mess cleared and check your gear next time." His tone was brusque but notably shaky. Kell didn't look at Arik, but Arik saw the veteran sergeant's jaw clench tight as he turned away. Gradually, the market square resumed a semblance of normalcy. People returned to their lunches or errands, though uneasy glances continued to dart in Arik's direction. The old crone who had screamed was muttering prayers under her breath, scowling at Arik from a distance. Mira grabbed Arik's arm. "Come on," she whispered urgently. She led him away from the square, around the corner of a corrugated shed where they could speak privately, out of immediate sight. Arik realized he was sweating despite the chill in the air. His hands were shaking uncontrollably. Mira's face was flushed, her eyes bright with adrenaline and fear. You did that, didn't you?" she hissed, keeping her voice low. "You stopped that crate. How?" "I don't know," he whispered back, throat dry. I saw it falling and I reached out and..." He broke off, running a hand through his hair in agitation. "I swear I don't know how." Mira pressed her back against the shed, staring at him as if seeing him for the first time. "This is what's been bothering you, isn't it? Not just nightmares. Something's happening to you." Arik opened his mouth to deny it, but the words died. What was the point of lying now? "I've been hearing things, seeing things that aren't there," he admitted in a rush, voice trembling. "Little things at first. I didn't think it meant anything, but it's getting worse. And now this." He gestured weakly toward the square and the wreckage beyond. Mira closed her eyes, absorbing his confession. "Spirits preserve us," she murmured. "Arik, it's like those tales. The witches." At that word, Arik felt a stab of panic. He moved closer and gripped Mira's shoulders. "I'm not a witch," he pleaded quietly. "I'm still me. You know me." She didn't pull away, but her expression was anguished. "I know. I'm sorry. It scared me. I won't lie." She took a shaky breath. "But I don't think you're evil, Arik. If whatever this is were evil, you wouldn't have saved Josen just now. You saved lives." Her words offered a ray of hope, but Arik's gut still churned with fear. "Others won't see it that way," he said. His eyes drifted to the corner of the shed. He could just glimpse the edge of the square where the old woman sat rocking and glaring, still convinced of sorcery. "They'll blame me for any bad thing that happens now. You heard her." Mira bit her lip. "I talked them down. Kell as well. They aren't sure what they saw. We can still explain it away." Arik shook his head grimly. "Maybe today, but if it happens again, I might not be so lucky. He realized he was still holding her and released his grip. His hands fell to his sides. Mira, maybe I should leave. Go into the wastes, away from here. She grabbed his arm fiercely. Don't even say that. You wouldn't last 2 days out there alone, and I'm not about to let you go and get yourself killed. Her eyes welled with sudden tears. You're like my brother, Arik. Whatever this is, we'll figure it out. Just keep your head down. Don't do anything out of the ordinary. No one will hurt you if nothing else strange happens. He wanted to believe her, needed to believe her. So he nodded and forced a tiny wan smile. All right, I'll try. Mira swiped at her eyes and straightened. Good. Now we should get back out there before someone comes looking. She glanced around to ensure no one lurked nearby. Meet me after sundown at my father's old workshop. We can talk more then, away from prying ears. Arik agreed quietly. Mira reached out as if to embrace him, then hesitated. Instead, she just squeezed his hand. Together they stepped back into the open, rejoining the flow of town life, as if nothing had happened. Cole was waiting for Arik back at the water plant, arms folded. His face was unreadable. Heard there was a ruckus at the square, he said casually, but his eyes flicked over Arik searchingly. Everything all right? Yes, sir, Arik replied, trying to sound normal. Just an accident with a crate. No one hurt. Cole nodded slowly, still studying him. After a pause, he grunted. Well, that's good then. Back to the grind. If Cole suspected anything, he kept it to himself. Afternoon passed in strained normalcy. Arik finished his tasks under Cole's supervision, keeping his head down and saying little. Now and then, he caught Cole casting a sidelong glance his way, as if wanting to ask something, but the older man remained silent. The incident in the square had set Blackridge on edge. Arik could feel the tension in the air like an approaching storm. Whispered conversations cut off when he walked by. Neighbors he'd known for years averted their eyes. The old sigil-drawing woman spit on the ground in front of him, muttering about curses, before a stern look from Sergeant Kell sent her scurrying indoors. Evening came, dull and grey. Clouds gathered overhead, crackling with distant electricity. Cole finally dismissed Arik as the day's light waned. Get some rest, the foreman said, not unkindly. We'll start early tomorrow, repairs on line 3. Arik mumbled assent and left the station. He headed toward his HAB unit with every intention of meeting Mira as promised. But first he desperately needed the solace of solitude, if only for a moment. His nerves were frayed raw. He entered his small dwelling and locked the hatch behind him. Only then did he allow himself to release a long, shuddering breath. In the quiet, the reality of what he'd done came crashing down. He had stopped a falling crate in mid-air. No pulley, no anti-grav, nothing but his will. It defied all reason. It was, by any measure, sorcery. And sorcery in this time of old night was a death sentence if discovered. Arik pressed his back against the wall, sliding down until he sat on the cold floor. In the dimness, he whispered aloud, "What am I going to do?" Silence answered, broken only by the soft hum of the HAB's heater. He wished, not for the first time, that his parents were still alive. They had died years ago during a particularly harsh winter plague. What advice would his father, a pragmatic man, give him now? What comfort would his mother offer? He felt achingly alone. After a minute, Arik noticed that the hairs on his arms were standing on end. The air in the HAB unit had grown thick and stifling. The hum of the heater seemed to have deepened into a low drone that resonated in his chest. He frowned and stood up. Something was off. Abruptly, a sharp crack rang out from outside, the bell at the watchtower. Once, Twice, 3 times it clanged, the urgent rhythm unmistakable. The alarm. Arek's heart leapt into his throat. He unbolted the hatch and threw it open. Dusk had settled, and along the town's perimeter, torches and floodlights were springing to life. Figures were running, shouting. He caught sight of Sergeant Kell on the rampart above the gate, bellowing orders. A distant gunshot echoed, then another. Arek's blood ran cold. An attack, and at such a time. He forgot his fear of moments ago and sprinted toward the wall. Around him, townsfolk were scrambling for shelter or arming themselves. Militiamen were already taking positions at the barricades. Over the clamor, Arek heard a shrill, inhuman howl carry on the wind, a sound that curdled his blood. The bone-faced devils had come. Chaos and fear surged through Blackridge, but Arek forced himself forward. Whatever terror hung over him could wait. His people were in danger now, and he would do whatever he could to help defend them. As he grabbed a spare las rifle from a weapons rack and clambered up the ladder to the barricade, Arek sent a silent prayer to any benevolent spirit listening. Let us survive this night. I'll face whatever curse I carry. Just please, let us survive the night. Night fell in full as Blackridge braced for war. The settlement's walls throbbed with gunfire and shouted orders. Under the sputtering light of flood lamps, dozens of misshapen figures charged from the darkness toward the town. They were the bone-faced mutants, once human, now twisted beyond recognition by radiation, and worse. Pale flesh stretched over skull-like faces, and their eyes gleamed with feral madness. They came on in a howling wave, clutching cleavers, spiked clubs, and crude slug throwers scavenged from the dead. Arek crouched behind the barricade atop the main gate, knuckles white around his las rifle. Every instinct screamed at him to run and hide, but there was nowhere to go. To his left and right, militia volunteers fired volleys into the onrushing horde. Muzzle flashes lit the parapet. He saw Sergeant Kell calmly line up shots with his pistol, dropping a mutant who had scrambled onto a rusted vehicle chassis as a makeshift ramp. The attacker tumbled back with a screech. For a moment, Arek's training asserted itself. He aimed over the lip of the wall and squeezed off a las bolt. The red beam lanced into a charging mutant, punching a smoking hole through its chest. The creature collapsed, twitching. Arek stared. He had never actually hit a target in battle before. A surge of grim resolve pushed through his fear. He adjusted his aim to another silhouette and fired again. Bright flashes and tracers crisscrossed the night. The mutants returned fire sporadically, their crude firearms flaring. A spray of bullets ricocheted off the metal plating near Arek's head, making him duck. Below, the main gate shuddered with heavy impacts. Through the firing slit, Arek glimpsed mutants battering it with a makeshift ram, a salvaged steel beam carried by 4 hulking brutes. Each slam dented the thick plasteel, the screech of metal twisting causing defenders on the wall to wince. "We need to break that ram," Sergeant Kell roared over the din. He grabbed a grenade from his belt, pulled the pin with his teeth, and hurled it down toward the gate's base. "Frag out!" The grenade detonated with a flash and an ear-splitting bang. 2 of the beam carriers were blown apart in a gout of blood and shrapnel. The ram fell from their grips. A ragged cheer went up from the militia. The reprieve was short-lived. From the gloom, more mutants rushed forward, trampling their fallen kin. Among them loomed an especially large mutant in scrap armor, wielding a large and crude sword. With an inarticulate bellow, he raised the weapon and began carving into the gate hinge. Sparks flew as the blade bit metal. Kell fired at the brute, but the mutant leader raised an armored forearm to deflect the shot. With a final tortured screech of metal, the main gate collapsed inward. The massive panel crushed the large mutant as it fell, but the damage was done. Blackridge's defenses were breached. Mutants poured through the breach with triumphant howls. Arik looked around. The section of wall to their right was a wreck of craters and torn metal from the night's explosions. There was no sign of Kell in the chaos, only a few dazed defenders and Mira, of all people, who had apparently come up to bring ammo or aid and ended up at Arik's side. Below, the gate lay flat in the mud. The courtyard beyond was devolving into a bloodbath. Mutants flooded the interior, met by pockets of desperate resistance. Arik saw Cole near the water station, swinging a pipe wrench into a snarling attacker's skull. Across the way, a knot of townsfolk with spears and pistols were surrounded and fighting for their lives. "Fall back to the inner compound," someone yelled. "Pull back." On the parapet, Mira tugged at Arik's sleeve. "We have to fall back," she cried. Arik nodded, throat dry. The outer defenses were lost. "Go. Get to cover inside the habs," he urged, ushering her toward the ladder on the wall's inner side. "I'll be right behind you." She opened her mouth to protest, but just then a pair of mutants clambered onto the walkway behind them, having scaled the collapsed gate. One was a scrawny thing with a rusted hook blade. The other, a brutish figure hefting a sawed-off shotgun. The scrawny leader cackled upon spotting prey. He flung his hook straight at Mira. She yelped as the metal barb caught her calf, yanking her off balance and drawing blood. "No." Arik lunged forward, placing himself between Mira and the mutants. He fired from the hip. One shot took the hook wielder in the gut. It collapsed, wheezing and clawing at the dirt, but the larger mutant leveled its shotgun and fired before Arik could react. The blast caught him full in the chest, pitching him hard onto his back. Searing pain spread where pellets punched into his vest and side. Arik's las rifle skittered from his grip as he hit the ground. Dazed and winded, he tried to scramble up, but the mutant was already looming over him, pumping another round into the chamber. Time seemed to slow. The shotgun's barrel gaped, centered on Arik's face. Mira was down, struggling to pry the hook from her bleeding leg. Arik was sprawled and unarmed, ears ringing and chest burning. This was how he would die, helpless on the ground, executed like a wounded animal. In that moment, something snapped open inside him, like a door swinging wide. A familiar whisper flooded Arik's mind, clear even amidst the battle. "Open the door, Arik." With a despairing howl, Arik did. He let go of all pretense, all fear of what he was, and embraced the torrent rising within. The air around him erupted in a blinding flare of light. A thunderous boom, not of gunpowder, but of raw force, blasted outward from Arik's body. The mutant with the shotgun was lifted off its feet and hurled backward as if struck by a giant's hammer. It slammed against a concrete pylon with a sickening crunch 20 paces away and moved no more. The net that had been pinning Arik incinerated into ash, shredded by the psychic blast. Arik himself rose to his feet without realizing it, a strange energy crackling in the air around him. His vision was tinged with searing white, and he felt heat dancing along his limbs. The third mutant, the brute with the net, staggered, stunned by the shockwave. Arik turned his blazing gaze upon it. Instinct and fury coalesced in his mind. With an upward slash of his hand, he sent a lance of incandescent fire straight at the creature. Pale flame, tinged with ghostly blue, engulfed the mutant. It gave a high, keening scream as it burned alive, thrashing for a moment before collapsing into a charred husk. Mira had freed herself from the hook and cowered a short distance behind Arik. She stared at him in utter astonishment and dread. Arik turned back toward her, his chest heaving. Glimmering wisps of energy wreathed him, casting his face in stark relief. He reached a hand out toward Mira. not entirely in control of his own motions. She flinched, scrambling back. Her eyes were huge, reflecting the eerie glow surrounding him. Arik's heart twisted. He opened his mouth to speak to her, to say something, anything, but before he could, a monstrous new howl split the night. From the sundered gate, the mutant horde faltered. Some shrieked in sudden fear. Others broke and ran, scattering back toward the darkness outside the walls. Arik dimly became aware that all across the courtyard, combat had ground to a halt, as everyone, mutant and human alike, turned to look at him. The remaining mutants began to retreat, yelping to one another in panic. Arik stood at the center of a widening circle of emptiness, bathed in an otherworldly radiance. Flames flickered at his feet, though nothing earthly burned there. The militia fighters, bruised and bloodied, did not pursue their fleeing enemies. They were all staring at Arik. He suddenly felt acutely exposed. The adrenaline and anger that had momentarily buoyed him drained away, replaced by a rush of shame and fear. The fire around him guttered and vanished, leaving only wisps of oily smoke. Without the psychic energy holding him upright, Arik swayed on his feet. He felt utterly exhausted, as if he had run for miles. Arik. Mira's voice, barely above a whisper. She had risen, leaning on a broken spear haft for support, her injured leg trembling. The way she looked at him, like one would look at a stranger or a dangerous animal, cut him deeper than any blade. It was too much. Arik's vision went black at the edges. He stumbled forward a step, reaching towards Mira, but then the ground tilted beneath him. He dimly sensed people rushing in from all sides. Voices, confused and afraid, echoed as if from a great distance. Arik fell to his knees. His strength failed, and he crumpled face first onto the blood-stained dirt of the courtyard. The last thing he heard before unconsciousness took him was a cacophony of frantic shouts. "Get ropes! Bind him! The witch boy is alive! Quick, before he wakes! God save us, what is he?" Mira's voice rose above the others in a wail. "Don't hurt him!" Then Arik knew no more. Arik awoke to agony and the taste of blood. For a disoriented moment, he thought he was still on the battlefield, but as his vision focused, reality came rushing back. He was bound tightly to a thick wooden post set in the ground. Coarse ropes bit into his wrists and torso. Dried blood crusted his temple where someone had struck him to keep him unconscious. It was early morning. One grey light filtered through gaps in the dilapidated roof above. He was in the center of the market square. The memories flooded in. The mutant attack, the power he'd unleashed, the terrified faces. Now, in the dawn hush, Arik heard the murmur of a crowd gathered beyond his field of view. Fear coiled in his gut. With effort, he turned his head. Dozens of townsfolk encircled the square at a wary distance. Many clutched weapons, pipes, knives, a few firearms. He saw Cole standing stiffly with arms crossed, face drawn. Sergeant Kell was there too, a bandage on his brow, his pistol holstered, but hand resting on the grip. Children peeked from behind their mothers' skirts with wide, frightened eyes, and near the front, pale and hollow-eyed, stood Mira. Her gaze met Arik's. In it he saw anguish and apology. She took a half-step forward, but a strong hand on her shoulder, Master Josen, the baker, pulled her back. Elder Nona, the closest thing Blackridge had to a spiritual leader, limped forward from the circle. The old woman's morning ritual of drawing sigils had been replaced with this grim duty. She spat on the ground. "You all saw what he did," Nona rasped, voice trembling with righteous anger. "The witch lit the very air on fire, called devils to our home." A few villagers shouted agreement. One man cried out, He nearly killed my son with that witch blast. Another voice, shrill and hateful, cut through. The same crone who had first accused him. I warned you, witchery, and now see what has befallen us. Mutants at our gates, death and ruin, all because we harbored a demon spawn. She jabbed a finger at Arik. Purge him, before worse comes. A rumble of assent passed through the crowd. Arik's throat tightened. His worst nightmares were coming true before his eyes. Sergeant Kell raised a hand, and the crowd quieted slightly. He stepped forward, face grim. We lost 7 people last night, he said, voice carrying. Another 5 injured. Could have been far worse if the mutants breached fully. He paused, then gestured toward Arik. This man's witch power drove them off. Possibly saved the rest of us. A ripple of unease went through the listeners. Arik caught a glimmer of hope in Mira's eyes. But Kell wasn't finished. His expression darkened. Yet had we known one of our own was cursed, perhaps the attack would never have come in the first place. Witches draw evil like corpses draw flies. For all we know, it was his presence, his magic, that led those devils here. He shook his head bitterly. Either way, we cannot suffer this anomaly to live among us. Mira broke free of Josen's grasp and pushed forward. Sergeant, please, she implored, moving to the front. Arik would never betray us. He's not in league with those things. He fought to protect us. She looked around desperately. You all know him. He's worked beside you, bled with you. He saved Master Josen's life yesterday and many more last night. Her voice cracked. He's a good man. This wasn't his fault. Some faces in the crowd softened, wavering, but Elder Nona's remained hard as flint. Child, she said to Mira, good or not, the boy is tainted. You saw what he can do. Today it was mutants. Tomorrow perhaps it's us he burns. Such power cannot be allowed to run wild. She leaned on her cane, eyes sorrowful but resolved. In the old times they would burn witches in purifying flame. It is the only way to be sure the evil is cleansed. At that, a low chorus of agreement rose. Mira shook her head frantically. No! You haven't even spoken to him, given him a chance. Mira. Arik's voice came out hoarse, but clear enough to quiet her. This argument was only riling the crowd further. He could see it in their faces. Nothing she said would change their terror. His fate was sealed. Mira, it's all right, he lied softly. They're right to be afraid. She turned to him, shouting her desperate plea. Arik, no, this isn't right. There has to be another way. We can help you. You can learn to control. There is no control for his kind, spat the crone, only the ruin of all around them. Arik winced, not from her words, but from the pang of despair in Mira's face. He straightened as much as his bonds allowed. Listen to me, he called out, attempting to address the crowd. I don't want to hurt anyone. I never meant for any of this. These powers, I didn't ask for them. His voice faltered, but he forced it on. All my life I've lived here, among you. You know me. We thought we did, someone muttered. Arik closed his eyes, gathering strength. If you let me go, I'll leave Blackridge. Exile myself. You'll never have to see me again. And risk you falling into the hands of some warlord who'll send you back at us as a weapon? Or worse, drawing the demon's gaze wherever you wander, Kell replied, shaking his head. No, we deal with this here and now. A heavy silence followed. Mira began to weep openly, shoulders shaking. Arik fought down the lump in his throat. He caught Cole's eye in the crowd. The foreman looked away, unable to meet his gaze. Finally, Elder Nona spoke with grim finality. We will send him from this world with the purifying flame. It is mercy, in a way. May whatever remains of his soul find peace beyond. At her nod, 2 militiamen came forward, carrying jugs of promethium scavenged from the generator reserves. Arik's heart pounded wildly in his chest. He struggled reflexively at the ropes, but they held fast. Mira rushed to Arik's side, ignoring the men as they began dousing the wood piled around the post. "I'm here," she whispered, taking his bound hand in hers. Her cheeks were wet with tears. "I won't leave you." One of the militiamen pulled her back none too gently. "Stay clear, girl," he muttered, "unless you want to join him." She stumbled away, nearly slipping in the mud, and was caught by Cole. The old foreman gently but firmly drew her into the arms of a few other women who tried to console her. Arik's hands trembled. The sharp reek of promethium filled his nostrils. Fear, like he'd never known, surged through him, nearly overwhelming. His eyes darted among the faces of his friends and neighbors. Most could not even look at him now. He was already dead to them. Nona took a torch from Kel, its end wrapped in oil-soaked rags and blazing. She hobbled toward the pyre. "May the flames cleanse this abomination," she intoned. Arik's vision blurred with tears. He wasn't sure if it was smoke or sorrow. This cannot be happening, some part of him thought desperately. Not like this, not by the hands of those I love. The torch descended, flickering toward the base of the piled kindling. "No, please!" Mira screamed, trying to lunge forward again. Cole held her tight this time, his own face streaked with silent tears. The torch touched the soaked timbers. With a whoosh, fire ignited and raced around the post. Within seconds, hungry yellow flames licked up at Arik's legs. He gasped as searing heat bit through his trousers. The crowd fell back, some hiding their faces, others watching with grim fascination. Arik's panic broke its bonds. Reflexively, he drew on the power within him, seeking escape, seeking anything to stop the pain. But unlike before, when he'd wielded it out of defense or anger, this time terror and agony guided his hand. The warp whisper in his mind seized upon his desperation like a beast scenting blood. "Yes, open yourself. Let me in." Arik screamed, a sound of pure torment that echoed off the buildings. But the voice beneath his scream was not wholly his own. It carried a resonance, a distortion that made the onlookers recoil. The flames around him suddenly blazed high, turning from yellow to a lurid violet. Elder Nona stumbled backward, dropping the torch with a cry. The fire twisted unnaturally, writhing as if alive. Within the violet blaze, shapes stirred. Tendrils of shadow and ember coalescing into a looming silhouette at Arik's back. "Embrace of the Eternal, protect us," someone whimpered. The vague silhouette solidified into a monstrous form taller than any man. It appeared as a living shadow of Arik, as though his very outline had detached and grown. Its eyes were pits of smoldering fire, and when it opened its mouth, a furnace glow shone within. Clawed hands rested on Arik's shoulders, almost gently, like a mockery of a comforting fatherly pose. Gasps and shrieks rose from the crowd. "It's a demon!" Sergeant Kell shouted, drawing his sidearm with shaking hands. Several villagers dropped to their knees in prayer or fled outright, scattering from the square. Only Mira did not flee. Breaking free of Cole at last, she limped forward, sobbing but determined. "Arik! Arik! Fight it!" she begged, stepping dangerously close to the blazing circle. The unnatural flames whooshed and snapped, but as Mira approached Arik, they seemed to recoil slightly, as if pushed back by an unseen force. The demon's burning gaze fixed on Mira. Arik's face contorted, and a snarl ripped from his throat. "Come closer, little fleshling. He can still hear you deep inside." The thing let out a peal of cruel laughter. How it tortures him. Mira locked eyes with the horror wearing her friend's body, Summoning all her courage, she stepped right to the edge of the violet flames, feeling their unnatural heat singe her hair. "Arik, I know you're in there," she desperately cried out, tears streaming. "This isn't you. You're stronger than it. Please, you promised you wouldn't leave me. Come back." For an instant, nothing happened. The shadow fiend's grin faltered, and Arik's bound form gave a violent shudder. Inside his mind, buried under waves of searing cold, Arik heard her voice. It was like a ray of sunlight piercing a storm. He latched onto it, mustering every remaining shred of will. The demon hissed as Arik resisted. "Stay back," it snarled at Mira, Arik's voice layered with a deeper growl. Wisps of blackness writhed around him as the entity struggled to maintain its hold. Mira did not retreat. "I'm right here, Arik," she said, softer but clear. "You're not alone. Fight it. You're stronger than it is." A convulsion racked Arik's body. He threw his head from side to side, and the shadowy figure behind him flickered. His eyes, still glowing, found Mira's. For a heartbeat, they dimmed to their normal brown. His lips moved, straining slowly to form words in his own voice. Mira." Joy and sorrow warred on her face. "I'm here," she encouraged, reaching a hand toward him through the low flames, heedless of the heat. The demon roared in fury. With an inhuman shriek, it forced Arik's body against the restraints, trying to lunge at Mira. The ropes smoldered and began to snap under the strain and sorcery. "I will rend your flesh," the entity howled, voice crackling. Its distraction proved its undoing. Seeing Arik struggling internally, Sergeant Kell, crouching behind a wagon, took careful aim at Arik's heart. A single shot cracked like thunder. Arik jerked as the bullet tore through his back and into his chest. His eyes went wide, the fire in them vanishing. For an instant, the shadow behind him clawed futilely at the air, its connection severed. Then Arik slumped in his bonds as a bloom of red spread across his shirt. "Arik!" Mira screamed. The demon gave a shriek of rage that quickly became a distorted wail. The smoky silhouette lost cohesion, unraveling into tendrils of darkness. A foul stench filled the square as the entity was sucked backward, away from the material realm. With a final echoing howl, the shadow exploded into a cloud of oily soot that rained down on the dying fire and the onlookers. And then it was gone. Sudden silence fell, broken only by the crackle of the remaining flames around the post. Arik hung limp, still lashed to the charred stake. Mira rushed through the dissipating violet flames, ignoring the searing pain as she pushed aside burning timber. She reached him as the last ropes gave way and caught his collapsing form, easing him to the ground. His blood soaked into her clothes as she cradled him. Arik's eyes fluttered open, back to gentle brown but growing dim. He looked up at her, and a weak smile ghosted his lips. "I'm sorry," he rasped, barely audible. Mira shook her head fiercely, tears dropping onto his face. "Don't apologize. It's all right. You're all right. Just hold on, Arik, please." Her desperate voice broke. He drew a rattling breath. The morning light haloed Mira's trembling form above him. So bright, so beautiful. Arik's vision blurred. He mustered the last of his strength to speak, voice a faint sigh. "Thank you for seeing me." A single tear traced down his cheek, his gaze fixed on a point beyond her, perhaps at the clear sky overhead. A small, contented smile came over his face, an expression of release. Then Arik of Blackridge went still, his final breath escaping in a soft sigh. Mira rocked over his body, keening in sorrow. Around them, the townspeople stood in stunned silence, a mix of relief, fear, and regret etched on their faces. None dared approach the pair at the smoldering stake. The horror had passed, but the horror's work was done. Blackridge had been spared the demon's wrath, yet in the broken figure of the young man lying in Mira's arms, the true cost of their survival became heartbreakingly clear. Blackridge endured, but it would never be the same. In the days after the pyre, the townsfolk buried their dead from the mutant attack in somber silence. Among the graves at the edge of the settlement lay a smaller mound of earth, unmarked by any headstone. Few spoke of the young man who rested there, save in hushed, uncertain murmurs. Some called him a hero for turning back the horde. Others cursed his name as the witch who nearly damned them all. Most simply avoided the topic, unwilling to confront the ugly truth of what had transpired. Mira left Blackridge shortly after. The morning she departed, a handful of friends tried to dissuade her, but she would not be stayed. With her she carried a small bundle containing Arik's personal effects, his pendant, a pocket diary he'd kept, and the charred remnants of the rope that had bound him. "I'll remember him as he was," she told Cole through her tears as she said her farewells. "Not as a monster, but as my friend." Then she set off alone into the grey wastes, determined to find meaning or penance far from the place that had been her home. Those who remained in Blackridge repaired the gate, rebuilt walls, and went on with the hard business of survival. But even as they rebuilt, a shadow of guilt hung over Blackridge's survivors. They had saved themselves, but at a price that would haunt them for years. Nights in Blackridge were a little quieter after that. The townspeople chalked more protective wards on their doors and left offerings of bread and salt at the crossroads, hoping to ward off vengeful spirits. They had prevailed over the horrors outside their walls, yet found themselves scarred by the horror that rose from within. On this, as on countless other worlds, similar tragedies played out during those dark centuries. Untrained Psykers, frightened, tormented souls like Arik, emerged only to be met with terror and violence. Some doomed their communities through uncontrolled eruptions of the uncanny. Others were slain at the first sign of witchery by those they once called friends. Humanity in the Age of Strife had no answers for these souls, only fear and fire. The unnatural storm still raged in the upper atmosphere, casting a pall of shimmering unreality across the sky on certain nights. The people would look up at those eerie lights with dread, remembering how easily the veil between worlds had torn open in their midst. Old Night had not ended. Its cruelty simply took new forms. As for the hell-born entity that had tried to claim Arik's flesh, it vanished back into the immaterial void with a howl of thwarted rage. But the denizens of that hellish realm are patient. They would wait through the long night of Old Night, eager to exploit humanity's every moment of weakness. In a future yet to come, the rise of a great savior on Terra and the dawn of a new age of unity would bring knowledge and sanction to Psykers, perhaps sparing others the fate that befell Arik. But for now, in this era of isolation and despair, there was no such salvation. All that remained was a grieving girl limping through the wasteland under ashen skies, and a hollow ache in the soul of a community that had saved itself by destroying one of its own. The Age of Strife would drag on for many lifetimes more, and in that time the light of hope guttered low. Yet maybe, just maybe, somewhere in the darkness, the memory of a kind boy who became something more might inspire a different path, or at least urge those left behind to question whether things truly had to be the way they were. Such questions linger in the quiet after the horror, unanswered and haunting. In the end, as the winds of Old Night continued to howl and humanity clung to survival, the tragic fate of Arik of Blackridge stood as a solemn testament, a lone spark of light devoured by the overwhelming dark. Thus concludes our passage through Shadows of Old Night, a stark reminder of the perils that lurked before the Emperor's light. In this age, salvation was but a fleeting dream, and the abyss claimed all who dared to hope. If this tale resonated with the darkness within, leave a like and consider leaving a token of support at our Ko-fi haven. The link lies in the archives below. To continue exploring the depths of the grimdark, strike the bell of notification. We hope to have earned your subscription today. Reflect upon the narrative you've witnessed. What thoughts stir within you about the fate of Psykers in such a forsaken era? Share your contemplations in the comments. Your insights fuel our journey into the shadows. Until our paths cross again in the darkness, remain vigilant.